Welcome to Chamber's presentation of our seminar. That's to say, myself and Matthew Dale Harris, the seminar on devolution and local government reorganisation, the planning perspective, we put in rather grand terms. We're delighted to see you all joining. There are a lot of people who have decided to join, and that's a reflection perhaps of the significance and indeed the interest that people have in this particular issue. As I say, my name is Matthew Reed, I'm King's Counsel, and I'll be the chair today, but I'll also be talking as well. I'm joined by my colleague, Matthew Dale Harris, who you can see on screen, and I'll formally introduce him in a moment. Thank you very much, Matt. He is a planning and environmental law specialist in Chambers. He has a busy practice working for local authorities across the country as well as developers, and is frequently instructed on local governance issues alongside his planning practice. He's on the Attorney General's panel of counsel, and he acts for and advises MHCLG, DEFRA and the EA, and the Marine Management Organisation. I don't think we're going to be dealing with the latter of those today, although Matt will no doubt see what he can do to get that in. Good. That's Matthew introduced. I'm not going to go through the process of introducing myself beyond saying that I'm King's Counsel, as I've already said, and I specialise in planning and local government and environmental law with property law crossover. More is available on my CV on the Chamber's website if you're at all interested. That said, I want to start then with my part of the presentation. I'm going to be dealing with a number of the issues as we go through, as well as then dealing with some of the Q&A alongside Matt. But I'll deal with what we're going to be addressing today firstly. I'll deal with an overview of the proposals and then look at what we are dealing with here, which is devolution and reorganisation. Devolution we'll come on to and look at the question as to whether or not devolution really is devolution in the context of planning. And is that the right terminology? Perhaps it doesn't matter. What's really important is what's going to be provided for, and that's going to be something that ultimately that's going to be something that's provided for ultimately through the bill that becomes an act, and we'll have to abide by it. So perhaps it's not that much of a debate that has anything more than academic interest. Nevertheless, we'll look at that sort of issue. As I say, devolution, we'll look at the reasons for and the benefits of the mayoral structures that are being promoted by the government, the devolution architecture and its progress. We'll deal with the strategic authority's powers in general terms. You can't really get to a conclusion as to whether as to what the extent of the planning powers are without understanding also the strategic authority's powers. So we'll look at strategic authority's powers in general, and then the planning powers, including, most importantly for present purposes, the spatial development strategies that are required to be put in place and are going to be put in place via the planning and infrastructure bill. But we'll look at the reorganisation issue, and the reorganisation issue is integral to the devolution approach, because reorganisation is really unitarization. And we'll see what the effect of unitarization is going to be, what the proposals are, what the potential benefits and the disadvantages are, and what the progress to reorganisation is. And it's a key theme, actually, of what we're dealing with here, that the progress has been very speedy as a result of the government's actions since it came to power last year, and we'll come on to that. Turning to the next slide. So let's deal with the current position. The current position is in relation to the authority structures, the local authority structures, is a tapestry. It's a wide range of different local authority arrangements, unitary, district and borough, and county above those. The authorities with that wider level of competence, if you're looking at it in the context of combined authorities, are created already under a range of different acts, the GLA and the mayor under the GLA Act 99, combined authorities under the 2009 Act, combined county authorities under LURA. And all of those various acts make provision for the sorts of institutions that we'll be looking at later on. And those sorts of institutions, under those acts, provide for individually their own powers and duties and their own governmental arrangements. And the approach of the government here has been to seek to essentially consolidate the position under what will be the English Devolution Bill, so that we're going to have a position where, despite the fact that there are these various legislative requirements, nevertheless, there'll be an overarching set of provisions that will give direction for the country as a whole. And that will involve both ensuring that the essential aim of devolution arises, but also controls how it will deal with the devolution, and the powers associated and duties associated with it will be controlled in a uniform way. Going on to the next slide then, please. So, an overview of the key proposals. I'll go through these in a reasonably brief way, because we'll come onto these in more detail later on. But first of all, and most importantly, the essence of devolution is the creation of a universal series of strategic authorities. Strategic authorities that will lie above the constituent authorities and any other remaining authorities. So there will be an overarching strategic approach that we see in a number of other guises throughout the country. And those will be ultimately adopted through a collaborative approach, but there'll be the ability for ministerial direction where progress hasn't been made. So the government is going to ensure that this happens. And what that will mean is that each one of the authorities, the strategic authorities that are instituted, will have their own framework of specific legislative powers. Noting that there is a division, and something that Matt will come on to, a division between the different sorts of authorities, strategic authorities. The mayoral strategic authorities are those that principally are going to be the strategic authorities with the greatest powers, and we'll come on to the other forms of strategic authority that won't have the same degree of control of their futures. The mayoral strategic authorities are also going to be run by majority voting, not a veto. And that's important for the purposes of ensuring that things get going with regard to the decision making within the strategic authorities, preventing the ability of one authority to prevent a particular direction being taken by the remaining authorities. Funding changes are going to occur. I deal with those reasonably briefly. The funding changes are going to occur because essentially what is aimed for is an integrated settlement. The integrated settlement funding already occurs for some authorities, Greater Manchester, the West Midlands, for example, and are also agreed for the future in Liverpool City and others, as I've specified. And those funding settlements will be multi-year. And the benefit of those integrated settlements being spread out throughout the strategic authorities is going to be the ability to move funding between policy areas. So that it means, at least in principle, from the planning perspective, there will be that delivery, that ability to deliver greater funding to planning, if that is what is chosen to be an appropriate approach. Next slide, thank you. So transport will also, we deal with transport in brief, because transport, of course, in part interrelates with planning. Transport, really, the provisions, at least in the white paper, have indicated that buses are going to be brought back into public control on a generalised basis. Policy changes will be made faster and simpler. Mayors will be given a statutory role in the rail network, and mayors will take on powers for coordinating their road network. And note here the degree of similarity that exists principally, and I don't say solely, but principally, with London and the mayor's powers here. Next slide, thank you. So then planning. All areas, with or without a strategic authority, will have to produce a spatial development strategy. adopted with the majority of constituent members. Note that, the majority. And we'll come back to this because, of course, it's critical. The spatial development strategy approach is one that is a flagship for the government in order to seek to achieve greater levels of development, and that will have to be put in place. Mayors will be able to charge a mayoral levy, like the London levy, and there'll be a stronger partnership between Homes England and the established strategic authorities. I'll again come back to that issue. Mayors will also have control of grant funding for regeneration and housing delivery. No, mayors. And so if one's in a situation where one just has combined authorities as a strategic authority, to which will come with Matt under the architecture, they'll have less control than the mayors will do, as they will in the context of the direction of travel of affordable housing programs. Next slide, thank you. If you could turn to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. And yeah, we'll deal, as I say, and it's to be noted that as part of the proposals, local government reorganisation will happen by way of a series of programmes that are currently in place, in fact, and will be in place as well, enabling the reorganisation for two-tier areas and unitary councils where there's a failure in respect of their delivery of various public services. Question is how that will be determined, which isn't clear at the present time. But the really key point is the two-tier areas being the subject of reorganisation, unitarisation, creating essentially councils with a population of 500,000 or more, although it's said that that will be on a case-by-case basis. Again, next slide, please. And the progress to date, there's been progress. The white paper identifies that there are 2 new mayoral combined authorities, Lincolnshire, Greater Lincolnshire, Hull and East Yorkshire, and 6 non-mayoral devolution agreements confirmed since July under the devolution deals. So there is already, as I said, a process by which devolution is taking place and will continue to take place. So the next slide, thank you. And so we go on then to the government's reasons for devolution and the mayoral structure. We'll come back to all of those issues before Matt starts. It's just worthwhile noting, and many people here, of course, will already be aware of this because they'll be involved themselves in the process, particularly in Surrey, as we'll come on to. But the aim of the government is to ensure that there is an overarching strategic approach which will control strategic issues in and around an area that ultimately will be the subject of a series of unitized areas. So you'd have significant authorities underlying the strategic authority, and that's the architecture that Matt will come on to. But I turn to Matt to deal with the reasons for devolution, the mayoral structure, and also the architecture.
Thank you, Matthew. I thought it'd be interesting just to, at this point, just as we start getting into some of the more of the detail, to reflect on some of the political vision that's revealed by the white paper. I mean, as I see it, there are sort of 3 main themes explored in the white paper in terms of their explanations to why the government sees this as such an important set of reforms. I mean, firstly, and perhaps unsurprising given the messaging of the government, goals of the government more generally, there is growth. That is obviously at the heart of much of the government's agenda. And in the context of devolution, there is a particular analysis, a particular political analysis, which the government subscribes to, which connects greater devolution with higher productivity. And I've put there an excerpted map from an OECD report, which the government refers to, which looks at productivity levels across Western Europe and gives a good kind of quick glance image of why the government is so concerned about productivity growth. Now, the white paper goes into a number of different ways in which it sees devolution as connected to productivity, with the key themes being the need for strong institutions at the right scale, an analysis that specialisms develop across economic areas rather than just in particular cities or districts, and a need for organisation at a sufficiently high level to take a strategic approach, but close enough to be responsive and accountable. So that's the kind of first theme, the sort of analysis of how this is going to deliver growth. Connected to that are 2 points really about consistency. The first is a need for better alignment, better integration of public services with governance. And again, one of the kind of key themes is that these strategic areas, this is to be created, these strategic authorities will in due course be aligned with all sorts of other public service provision. And we'll see that one of the criteria taken into account when considering what the boundaries should be is to look at how services such as NHS services or others are currently divided up in our system. Then there's a general point about consistency, and the government fairly, I think, takes the point that our patchwork is extremely difficult to follow and rather opaque. And there's a clear goal of trying to achieve consistency across the country, by which I mean England here. Then the final strand, which I've got in the last 2 bullet points, is really all around accountability and trust. The government posits that we need fewer but more empowered leaders. Repeatedly cites, or maybe cites at certain occasions, evidence showing that members of the public have a much better idea of who their mayors are, which is part of the reason why they're so keen on mayors. And takes the view that trust is secured by empowered local leaders, and particularly, again, elected mayors. Now, the benefits of the mayoral structure, I think it's revealing some of the examples that the government chooses to pick out. Thinking back again to those kind of key themes of driving growth and better accountability. Firstly, they pick out some examples around what the West Yorkshire mayor, who, and we see there on the right, has been up to. So she's been exercising soft power, convening local partners, and she's been visiting Nashville to talk about potential trade and investment links around healthcare and tech. Other examples discussed include discussions between mayors and between the mayors and the nations, through 2 bodies. One's the Council of Nations and Regions, and then there's the Mayoral Council as well. And they talk about particular funding deals and investment deals agreed internally in the East Midlands. So that's the sort of that's part of the political vision underlying the programme. Then we look at the real nuts and bolts of what's proposed. So there's to be an architecture of essentially 3 different layers of strategic authority. First, foundation strategic authorities. These will be non-mayoral, using either the existing combined authorities structure or existing combined county authority structure. Alternatively, there can be local authorities designated as a strategic authority, but the white paper is clear that that's to be regarded as an exception and a stepping stone to other forms of combined authority. That forms, if you will, the first kind of rung on the hierarchy. Above that will be mayoral strategic authorities, including all existing mayoral authorities as exist. And then a subset beyond that will be established mayoral strategic authorities who meet eligibility criteria. There is a hierarchy of powers which is set out within the white paper in a section called the Devolution framework. And broadly, what you see is that as you progress down that list or up the hierarchy, the powers granted to the strategic authorities increase. So they'll all have, in a planning context, they'll all have a duty to produce a spatial development strategy, which Matthew will come on to in more detail in a moment. But foundation authorities, for example, won't have strategic development management powers. They won't have an ability to raise mayoral sill. They won't be able to make mayoral development orders or establish development corporations. So a clear stepping up as you get into the mayoral system. Now, established mayoral status is essentially tied to performance. There are specific criteria, and the government in the paper commits to upgrading mayoral authorities, strategic authorities, as and when those criteria are met. So they have to have been in place for 18 months from the request to move to being an established mayoral authority. There must be a published local assurance framework in place, and there must be no outstanding investigations or material concerns on managing public money. So a number of combined authorities, Greater Manchester, Liverpool City, North East, South Yorkshire, West Midlands and West Yorkshire will already have met the criteria and will receive integrated settlements. And then all, once they take it on, will receive the additional powers set out in the devolution framework, whatever the pre-existing devolution deal. Special mention is given to London, which is treated slightly differently from the other forms of authority. Its devolution settlement will be strengthened, and the government will explore how the integrated funding settlement will work specifically in the context of London. So it's not being dealt with just as a normal established mayoral authority. Reasons why that might be are given in relation to London's role as a global city, and there's a specific commitment to look with the mayor at international models. The Greater London Authority Act will be reviewed, and some examples are given which the government's going to look at around particularly the disposal of TfL operational land and funding. The criteria for the establishment of the size of new strategic authorities are set out in some detail. I've put them there. So a combined target population is 1.5 million people. Look for sensible economic geographies and contiguous councils. They're clear, the government, that it's not just single travel to work areas. You're going to have to look probably much broader than that. A goal, obviously, of no devolution islands, because this is going to be a comprehensive coverage of the country of England. You'll need to perhaps flex the strategic authority areas to ensure that no one's kind of left out. A goal of passing on of alignment with other public sector boundaries, and also looking for shared identity. The paper makes very clear that mayors are the government's strong preference, and you won't be able to call them anything else, which is the case now. And otherwise, although you will be able to create non-mayoral authorities, or indeed single local authorities, the latter will only be as a stepping stone to another form of combined authority, and the powers will be more limited. And the government explains that by reference to their goal of enabling mayors to concentrate on the higher level strategic devolved responsibilities, whereas the leaders of the to-be unitary authorities will be able to focus on delivering services in their individual areas. And I'll pass back to Matthew to take it on from here.
Good. I hope you can hear me now. Sorry about the difficulties with regard to that. And I'll just go back to where I was, which was revised voting and governance arrangements. So the overarching point about the governance arrangements, so the specific function, there are a number of specific functions that are going to be exercisable only by mayors, which is my point previously about how if you've just got combined authorities rather than mayoral combined authorities, then there are going to be limited, more limited powers available to them. And the reason that there should be, it's considered, a mayoral system as being the primary system is because, as the justification is set out in the white paper, when residents elect a mayor, they need to know, it said, that key decisions can't be blocked by a single council and the decisions will be taken that drive long-term economic growth. That's what's said. And the purpose, of course, is to ensure that actually you do get the sorts of steps towards progress that are promised under these various authorities. And what that will mean is that there's going to be a standardization of the governance arrangements. And in mayoral strategic authorities, that's going to be by way, as I said earlier on, of a majority vote, which will include the mayor, and they or that process will then lead to the decisions being made in respect of any particular functions. And what one will have are constituents, members, and if you're dealing with a two-tier area, county councils are going to be a constituent member. District councils, they can't be a constituent member, but they're able to be a non-constituent member. As I said earlier on, when I was introducing the matters that we're going to be dealing with and introducing what the content of the white paper is, in terms of unitarization and reorganisation, that is a fundamental part of the process taking place alongside devolution, so that as and when unitarization takes place, that unitary member will then become one of the constituent members of the strategic authority. So I say that this is all set out in the white paper, or this is going to happen through the white paper, but it actually is already happening. There is, as I said earlier on, a range of legislative provisions in place which enable the creation of the various authorities, combined authorities of one kind or another. The process of enabling that to happen is set out by way of an example in respect of Sussex. And already there's consultation on a mayoral combined authority for East Sussex, West Sussex, Brighton and Hove. What's proposed is a similar system to that which has been set out within the white paper. Decision making is undertaken by the mayor as a constituent member, and then with 2 constituent members per authority. And then non-constituent members can actually be given voting rights by the combined county authority, which is an interesting step, because it does mean that in circumstances where you have non-constituent members, as defined, they're going to be given a greater role than otherwise might be considered to be in line with the approach being taken by the government in general terms. And then there are various other provisions in place, including the fact that constituent members would be able to appoint 6 non-constituent members and associate members as well. The details are set out in the consultation and can be found pretty readily in that document. Now, I'm going to go on to deal with the powers shortly, but what one needs to note is that the strategic authorities are going to have a list of competencies that are then set out within the devolution framework as specified. And that devolution framework will then be capable of evolving. In terms of the range of various issues, I've dealt with those in part in the context of the financial position and integrated settlements. But if we're concentrating just on the position here in transport and infrastructure, housing and strategic planning, those are all proposed to be part of the competencies that the strategic authority will be given the ability to control. Before looking, as I say, to those various competencies or powers, I'll deal with briefly with the progress of the development of strategic authorities within the country. And the aim in the white paper is stated to be that one should get to a situation where, at least to the level of the foundation strategic authorities, as Matt has indicated, those are put in place, and ahead of the bill, there will then be a devolution priority programme, which was announced in February of this year, whereby various authorities that are in a position to be able to commence with the process of achieving the devolution structure are given the ability to do so. And Cumbria, Cheshire and Warrington, Norfolk and Suffolk, Greater Essex, Sussex and Brighton, Hampshire and Solent are those that are identified, with the consultation in place under the various legislative provisions to achieve it. So turning then to the mayoral strategic authority powers and planning, I'm going to deal just briefly with the position in relation to the powers before looking in a little more detail to in powers generally, rather, before dealing with the planning position. And looking at the powers themselves initially, and it's a centre point of the approach that's adopted with regard to the combined authorities, there's proposed to be a local growth plan that the SA will put in place, which sets out the long-term vision for growth in the region. The purpose of it, of course, being to provide what is described in the white paper as a roadmap for achieving the sort of development that ultimately should take place within these strategic authority areas. And the government has said that it will work with the mayoral SAs to agree strategic priorities as part of that process. The position with regard to mayoral strategic authorities is different from the foundation strategic authorities, because the foundation strategic authorities aren't going to provide or be required to produce a local growth plan. They have to provide a vision for the future. And so there will be less emphasis on the overarching role of a growth plan, as would be the situation with mayoral strategic authorities. And mayors will become, as we'll deal with, responsible for strategic planning. As Matt said, there's a much greater range of direction available to the mayoral strategic authorities. Mayors of established strategic authorities will be given a strategic direction power with regard to the future of affordable homes programmes, which is again consistent with the giving of that greater level of power. Those powers and duties, as I said earlier on, extend to transport in relation to transport funding as part of the integrated settlement. Local transport funding streams will be available for choice by the strategic authorities. In relation to roads, the strategic authorities will, again, similar to the position in London, have control over the key route networks for local roads, enabling those to be strategically managed, whilst the local roads and the non-key road networks will stay with the various constituent authorities in terms of their powers. There will be other highway functions run concurrently between the strategic authorities and the constituent authorities. And local transport authorities will then be empowered to regulate on various issues, including what's described as the scourge of badly parked cycles and e-cycles, which no doubt some people have a view on. But again, what one sees is an attempt to try to have an overarching view of the needs of transport sustainability and the transport deliverability within the SA's area. And that continues into devolving approvals for stopping up orders and for the ability of local highway authorities to stop up roads subject to planning permission. Mayors are also going to have a role in the rail network. And whilst I've summarised the position there, the role within the rail network is going to be one where the mayors are going to have the ability to collaborate with the decision-making processes in respect of the rail network. And in respect of established mayoral strategic authorities, they're going to have a right to request further rail devolution. In terms of buses, again, local transport authorities will be able to decide whether to pursue bus franchising or other forms of delivery. Local transport plans, there'll be a requirement that strategic authorities will have regard to them in the creation of any policies that they adopt, which is going to then mean an integrated approach between the SDSs, to which we'll come, and the transport plans. And there'll be the publication of new guidance to support that integration. So, as I said, the important aspect here is in respect of, for our purposes, is in respect of the strategic planning position. And all areas, with or without a strategic authority, are going to be required to develop a spatial development strategy and over a strategic geography within a defined time frame. And I'll come on to that in a moment in relation to what we will see under the recent provisions put before Parliament. And when one's looking at it in the context of mayoral strategic authorities, they're going to be empowered to produce the SDSs, as I'll call them, approved, as I've said, with a majority support. Foundation strategic authorities, or SAs, are going to require the provision of SDSs under the agreement of the authorities, but with intervention powers by the Secretary of State. And once the SDSs are in place, then there are going to be development management powers available to intervene in planning applications of potential strategic importance. Again, look back to the position in London as an example. That's what's sought to be achieved. So the legislation has now commenced to achieve that through the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and Clause 47 in particular. And the approach within Clause 47 is to place the obligation on a principal authority, which is basically a combined authority, a unitary authority, or where you don't have unitarization on a county council. And there's also the ability of the Secretary of State to put in place planning boards, which would be composed of two or more principal authorities. So basically, in circumstances, whilst it's possible to have combined county authorities, for example, two of them brought together to deliver an SDS through a planning board, principally it's going to be in a situation where there are no combined authorities in a particular area, and a planning board to bring those together in order to provide for the SDS will be put in place. And as part of the process, the district councils will be consulted on the delivery of the SDSs. Now, the SDS is a statement of the policies of strategic importance to a particular area. There has to be a reason, justification, and a period for which it is to have effect. And that requires then a timetable to be set out to achieve the delivery of the SDSs. And that timetable has to go to the Secretary of State. So you can see that, of course, the promise has been to deliver up further housing and quickly. And the SDSs, by way of the timetabling requirements, are aiming to have, by way of this timetable, are aiming to have them in place in short order in order to deliver that level of housing. Now, they've got to be prepared, having regard to other policies, including the LTP that I referred to earlier on, and any other plans that are produced by the constituent authorities. And once you've got the timetable in place, the timetable, as I say, goes to the Secretary of State for approval. If it's too long, then it'll be shortened by the Secretary of State. But once that's then agreed to, the process of preparation carries on. There'll be consultation and examination in the usual way, all provided for within the insertion into the 2004 Act by way of clause 47 of the bill. What will happen is that there'll be, as I'll deal with in a moment, examination by an inspector, and the plan will have to be withdrawn unless the Secretary of State says that it shouldn't be withdrawn, i.e. it needs to go forward. Now, the matters to be examined are interesting because what the bill says at the moment is that what's to be examined is such matters affecting the consideration of the spatial development strategy as the examiner considers appropriate. No indication and no reference to soundness in the context, of course, of the 2004 Act, which specifically makes reference to the soundness being tested of local plans and indeed development plans, but those are not directly inputted into the SDS process. Of course, the NPPF makes clear that SDSs, as much as any others, are going to be the subject of a consideration of soundness, but it seems to me there certainly needs to be some redrafting in respect to that issue, unless I've misunderstood some particular aspect of it. But what one sees is necessarily an assessment of the various provisions, and in reality, there will be a test to consider whether or not the approach is sound. There isn't, however, a requirement that the SDSs have to reflect that which is set out by the various constituent authorities. There, of course, are going to be, as the bill sets out and as would be expected, a series of regulations that will deal with the Strategic Planning Board, which may shed further light on that issue. So the SDSs, are we actually dealing with devolution in the context of the planning system? The short answer is that if one is looking at the issue of housing numbers, that's going to stay with central government because it's going to be under the provisions of the standard method. No indication it would be anything but that. So you've still got, to the extent that the standard method is directed by central government, you've still got the housing numbers being set by central government. So the importance of the SDS is about spatial locations for the delivery of strategically important development. And it's that's going to be the subject matter of the SDSs. Of course, the more directed they're going to be, the more contained they're going to be, the easier and the quicker they're going to get through. What one needs to look at it in that light, and when one sees it in that light, in reality, we don't have devolution with regard to the delivery of a particular level of housing. What we have devolution of is the decision as to where it will go. But where is that coming from? Well, that comes from the local position. All the districts in the local plans, hitherto, prior to that, which I'll deal with in a moment, have delivered where development is going to go. So actually, it's taking away power from a localized perspective and bringing it to a higher one. So in that sense, it's not devolution either. But nevertheless, the position is, as I said earlier on, is where we find it. One thing to note, though, is that what we're looking at here is a situation that is bringing back that which has been here before. The RSSs, the structure plans, they are all ones that sought to direct on a spatial strategic basis development. So we are, in a sense, going back to that which we've experienced previously. I've dealt with Catriona Riddle's analysis of the SDSs in order to see what progress there is, because it's important to note that actually there's a lot of quick progress with regard to what we are going to be finding in a particular area. Now one can see that connected to, of course, the delivery of strategic authorities. Back in January, there are a number of areas where you didn't have any strategic authorities agreed to, and those are in the blue dots. So note those blue dots in this list. But if you look at February and where we are now, the number of areas that aren't the subject of agreement as yet and aren't the subject of proposals has radically reduced. So there has been a deal of progress that's taking place, and we've included in the slides Catriona's very helpful description of the position as at least it was back in January. But as I said, to support the position, there will be strategic powers available for mayors to raise community infrastructure levies, the powers to apply for CPOs. Established mayoral strategic authorities will be able to establish their own public sector land commissions, and all mayoral strategic authorities are going to be given the ability to control grant funding to support regeneration and housing delivery. So a whole range of powers associated with the SDSs and the SAs are being put in place. And in addition, in order to deliver those levels of housing, there'll be work with Homes England on a more entrenched basis beyond what we know at the moment, which is the strategic place partnership relationships that take place with the established, what are currently described as the established mayoral authorities. Affordable housing, again, there'll be a greater degree of involvement in terms of established mayoral authorities being able to direct where affordable housing provision will take place through the strategic place partnership. So that's where we are with regard to the situation on the SDS and the powers. You can see powers in place, significant ones, aligned with the delivery under the SDS. And it's an important series of steps in progress towards what on the face of it is going to be a reasonably seismic result, particularly for those in the south of England. It's associated with local government reorganisation that Matt is now going to deal with.
Thanks, Matthew. I'll try and cover this bit fairly quickly because I'm conscious of time. As I set out on the slide, local government reform obviously has a long history, particularly the goal of trying to abolish existing structures and replace them with unitary authorities was mooted in the 50s and then contained in the 69 Royal Commission report, which I've got on the right-hand side. That didn't happen following the election of 1970. And as we've already said, our existing system is patchy. So what's proposed now is a comprehensive programme of local government reorganisation within England. All two-tier areas are to be abolished at the local government level. That's to take place as quickly as possible, including through legislation if necessary. And the government's committed to significant progress in this Parliament. Government wants to see, I thought an interesting line in the white paper was that the government wants to see stronger community arrangements as a sort of part of this. So there's reference to neighbourhood groups, parish councils, town councils, and it'll be interesting to see what emerged in terms of the government's thinking around neighbourhood planning as part of this picture. But the goal is to create unitary authorities mainly of populations of around 500,000 or more. Not clear what that's going to mean for existing smaller unitary authorities. I've given a few examples there. I mean, the government sets out in general terms that they'll be looking at reorganising unitary councils where there's evidence that those are not succeeding in the delivery of their services due to their size. But I imagine this will be some way down the priority list, given the number of councils that have to be dealt with where there is already a two-tier system. The powers to achieve this are principally already in place. The 2007 Act allows for invitation or direction for principal authorities to have a single tier of local government in the area. And that's implemented through order following any advice from the Local Government Boundary Commission. That's going to lead us to a situation where we have unitary authorities of significant scale, around 500,000, and then above them, strategic authorities with about 3 times the population. I'll now pass back to Matthew to finish us off with the justification for unitarisation and the debate around that.
Thanks very much, Matthew. So, yes, I mean, the justification for unitarisation is based around efficiencies. Costs are identified as being capable of being saved in a significant way. With service transformation as well identified, i.e. Supported housing, social care, homelessness, all being brought together in the same organisation. So you have, again, efficiencies, workforce pressures reduced, local accountability is increased, it's said, because there's a clearer picture of who's in charge with the delivery of devolved and mayoral systems, as well as then enabling, and the white paper says, enabling the provision of community and partnership working. So the justification really is around that aspect. But when one's looking at the arguments to and for and against, on the one hand, we have the position set out in the white paper that it is going to be bringing forward efficiencies and helping actually the governmental process. But there are a series of other observations in an article by Professor Kopus. He refers to other studies that have been undertaken, which shows that there aren't, or it indicates that there hasn't been such a level of efficiency savings or effectiveness. And other observations have been made by County Council's network and the District Council's network, both of which have made observations online that we've set out. And indeed, a researcher at the House of Commons Library noted that the international experience, that it sometimes saved money and sometimes didn't. As a result of that, there are a range of other views with regard to whether or not, in truth, devolution is unitarization rather is going to have the sort of benefits that are alleged by the government. Nevertheless, that we are dealing with the reorganisation, we're dealing with unitarization, which will happen, and alongside devolution. And those elements are ones that are being brought forward in short order. And it's a matter of how to deal with those. And one thing I ought to mention that, of course, part of the unitarization process is going to lead to, and the government said so in the letters that it's written in relation to this issue, is going to lead to the need for shadow unitary authorities to be in place as soon as possible. And we set out there an example of one of the letters that was written by Jim McMahon, who's the Minister for Local Government and English Devolution, setting out the position as to what is required, at least of the Surrey authorities. There's a very quick turnaround with regard to the Surrey authorities as to what they have to do. And what has happened is that the councils have responded by way of a response on the 21st of March of this year. And that response actually has set out two options, one by Surrey County Council, one by the districts and the boroughs. They say 3 unitaries, SCC say 2 unitaries. So there'll have to be a resolution of that issue ultimately through the processes of the delivery of the combined authorities. So there's progress and, of course, complexity around that. And that progress is being put in place in quick order. So that's where we are with regard to unitarization. That's where we are with devolution. We have a short amount of time to answer questions that I know have been coming up in the chat. And I think one of the questions related to the national park authorities and what is the situation with regard to them. Well, actually, the white paper, I think this is right, because I've checked it, but the white paper doesn't actually make any, doesn't actually give any indication as to what the situation is going to be within the national park authorities, and as to how they are going to be run in the context of the combined authority system. In logical terms, they will be part of the overall processes, but it's something that's to say they'll be subsumed within the unitarization and or the devolution system. But there's no specific provision within the white paper as yet. Matt, I don't know whether or not there are any particular questions that you...
Yeah, I was going to pick up, we've got a couple of questions about the impacts which the commencement of the powers around the new set of spatial development strategies will have on existing local plans, or even on emerging local plans with strategic policies. And I suppose the first point on that is that the legal commencement as set out in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, obviously we have to see what comes out at the end of the parliamentary process, but as it stands, it doesn't have any immediate effect on the status or otherwise of either an emerging plan or an existing plan as a matter of law. I mean, of course, as already we know in the framework, and this is obviously familiar from the London context, it's clear the framework currently says that you can have strategic policies in both spatial development strategies and in local plans, but in practice, that because the spatial development strategy essentially overrides, because the local plans have to be in general conformity with it, and if they're made subsequently to a local plan, they don't have to be in any conformity with anything that's in the local plans. Because of that, in many cases, where the strategic matters that are being identified by the spatial plan have been identified and are emerging, you'll find inspectors and others questioning quite hard why a local authority, whatever form that is at the relevant time, given the reorganisation, why that's promoting a strategic policy which appears to be due to be dealt with by the strategic authority. So there will be complications. I mean, all sorts of complications. The government's been clear that they want local plans to continue to be progressed, so that's set out in the white paper, and they're also they're emphasising the need to get spatial development strategies in as quickly as possible. So there's going to be a lot of churn. I think I've got some concerns myself as to the capacity of the inspectorate and how that's going to work, given the number of new plans that are effectively going to be required. And we know from previous plan making reorganisations that there can be significant in problems when you're moving from one set of plans to another. But at the moment, that's the goal. You have to keep going with all plans essentially. The current obligations remain, but I think it's right that the local authorities will have to adjust to what's coming through the spatial development strategies.
Yeah, I entirely accept that point, and I think you're right about that. The other aspect of it is that, of course, the SDSs will be the later of the plans in likelihood at some point, as a matter of likelihood. And that being the case, in the usual way, the legislation will apply to those SDSs. That indicates the later of the plans policies will take precedent. But what that means, of course, is that you have the ability to have the potential, the SDSs, to be contradictory to the position taken on the local plans. One way to avoid that problem is to ensure that there's an integrated discussion or an integrated approach by the local plan making authorities and the strategic authorities through the memberships that occur in the strategic authorities, and for those then to lead to a resolution of some of those potential problems. There'll have to be, in short, cooperation between the SAs and the existing local plan making authorities. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Matt. There are complexities there. One of the complexities is, as you've already indicated, is how the inspectorate are going to accommodate the extra tranche of plans that will be coming forward in short order.
Yeah.
But that we'll see about rather at some point in the future. So I think that is everything we have time for today. We hope that you found the seminar helpful, and to the extent that we've been able to, the questions that we've answered have been useful. We're very grateful that you attended. Thanks for coming.